While Jonathan Hilstrand may not have the same level of fame as Captain Sig Hansen and Phil Harris, he has amassed a sizable fan base. So when he unexpectedly saw something during an otherwise mundane crab pothole on the Bering Sea, he boldly asserted that it would revolutionize marine biology. After Captain Sig Hansen retired as a fisherman and Captain Josh Harris of the Cornelia Marie left the show, fans of the show turned in to watch another show featuring Jonathan Hilstrand and his family. Fans of the show were hoping that this would fill the big void left by Captains Hansen and Harris. The Hilstrand family is well known for their exceptional fishing skills. They have been involved in the sport for generations, and no one could have predicted that Jonathan would one day discover a sight that would shock the world. We will discuss this unexplained sighting later in the video, but first, let's discuss the reasons Jonathan and his family are unique and popular. Over a period of time, the family business was passed down from Earl David Hilstrand to his son John Hilstrand Sr., who continued his father's work and elevated it. John also included his own sons, Jonathan and Jonathan Jr., as early as the age of 3 on fishing excursions with their father Jonathan. Was born with an innate talent for fishing, and by the age of 7, he and his brothers were venturing out on their own. The family business had passed down through the generations, so things weren't always smooth sailing. Perhaps as a result of the perilous conditions on the Bering Sea, their father took a more authoritarian approach to teaching, but it evidently yielded the desired results. Jonathan and his brothers, the son fearlessly rode the waves to his father, as was expected given that fishing on the Bering Sea was more than just a means to an end. It was a way of life that had to be preserved at all costs, according to their father. Unfortunately, there were times when their father went overboard in establishing rules without consideration for the consequences, but it did teach the son's trade, and Jonathan was particularly gifted at it. At the age of 17, he dropped out of high school to pursue a career in fishing full-time, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather. Jonathan fished for crabs and lobsters along the New England coast, and he was always eager to learn and improve his technique. After this, while Jonathan was starting to make a reputation for himself, his dad built a fishing boat that they called the Time Bandit. It was the family boat, but it wasn't free. Jonathan and his brother had to pay for it. Despite this, Jonathan had no problem using the boat for their first crabbing season, even though he was 28 years old. Tim and his brothers worked hard, but their father insisted on keeping all of the fishing season's earnings for himself, saying they weren't enough to cover the cost of the boat. The boys thought their dad was asking for too much, so they estimated that John Sr.'s demand for the boat's compensation would have slowed down Jonathan and his brother's pursuit of a fishing lifestyle they desired, so he and Andy built their own boat. However, Jonathan refused to abandon the family legacy, so he gave the boat the name Time Bandit and set out for the seas, determined to fulfill both his own desires and those of his ancestors. Legacy, though there was a catch. Since Jonathan wasn't the sole owner of the boat, he couldn't serve as captain alone. Instead, he and his brother Andy had to divide and conquer when it came to the captaincy duties, with Andy taking the helm during the Alio season and Jonathan during the Red King crab season to keep things running smoothly. Their work was so impressive that Deadliest Catch asked them to be on the show. Discovery Channel launched the show in April 2005, promising viewers an inside look at what they called the deadliest job on Earth. However, the show delivered more than just that. Fishing in the Bering Sea is an exhilarating adventure activity, and the daring and courageous Alaskan crab fishermen confront numerous harsh and unforgiving situations that test their mettle, such as towering waves that could carry them away, biting cold that could crack bones and eat toes, perilous ice flows, and occasionally horrific deaths, all in the name of catching a lucrative crab harvest in this cruel world of commercial crab fishing, where 400 out of 100,000 crabbers die. The only reason this number has slightly decreased is because of improvements in healthcare and technology, but it still happens. Jonathan witnessed one that made him question everything, but more on that later. The show these crabbers wanted to be a part of was the Deadliest Catch. They were willing to risk their lives for the sake of public taste, so why not gain TV fame while showing the world how they catch seafood? The fame came with its drawbacks, but we'll get to that later. Jonathan is deserving of the attention he's receiving from viewers and viewers alike. He's highly respected by his fellow crabbers. The captain they expected to bring in the largest haul when fishing was Jonathan, but his methods weren't scientific. Instead, he relied on his gut instinct, which made him a notorious gambler. Trusting his gut isn't as easy as it sounds, especially when he's at sea. Jonathan is always on the verge of losing it due to the challenges and risks of crabbing, so he makes an effort to have fun for himself and his crew. His wild energy is contagious and has been known to spread to other ships as well. Once, while they were at sea and resting in an Alaskan hotel, Jonathan went to the restaurant when all of a sudden there was a rumbling. Upon hearing rumblings from the restaurant, the staff promptly contacted the city police and the hotel security guards, informing them that Jonathan was engaged in a physical altercation. The guards and police arrived at the scene in a mad dash to apprehend Jonathan, but instead of placing him under arrest, they decided to let him go. Everybody in the room was covered in cake and cream, and the guards felt embarrassed by how he fought. Instead of breaking noses, smashing teeth, or busting lips, he threw food at people. He was simply having fun, and sometimes that meant playing pranks on the other fleet captains. While at sea in 2013, fighting the elements, things got out of hand when deckhand David Zielinski, under Jonathan's orders, tried to launch a firework at another fishing vessel. David couldn't refuse his captain, so he went ahead and did it, but to his surprise, the fireworks didn't launch but instead exploded. The incident occurred right in David's hand. He sustained severe injuries to his hand, and all signs indicated that he would lose it. As a deckhand, losing a hand meant you were done for the job. David was rushed to the hospital and had to undergo multiple surgeries to save his hand. Regrettably, David's life was nearly cut short due to the lengthy recovery process. Consequently, he sued. After a protracted trial, the judge found in favor of David, despite Jonathan and Andy Jonathan's claims to the contrary, and ordered the brothers to compensate David, now their former employee, for the accident. However, the judge only granted David half of what he requested, acknowledging that David shared responsibility for the unfortunate incident. It didn't deter Jonathan from trying to have fun. In fact, he continued to play pranks on his fellow captains. This time, though, he decided to handle things himself and put in maximum effort to pull off his perfect prank. The crew of the ship thought they had a crab line that was attached to a completely rusted truck, got a fantastic haul of crabs, and put in a lot of work to bring them in, thinking it would be worth it. Instead, what they found was a rusted truck. Jonathan was living it up until one night when he had a wild idea. You know how sighting UFOs has become really popular, and decided to take his ship out to sea on. Jonathan enjoyed playing on his crew's fears, which inspired him to pull more pranks. On a dark night, he asked them to turn off all the lights and light lanterns, which he then sent into the sky. The captain of the other ship saw this and yelled out, "Aliens!" The crew was terrified that they were about to be abducted. Jonathan, who gained a reputation as the bad boy of the Bering Sea, is renowned for his ability to keep morale high through his antics and jokes. He is also the unrivaled prankster in the Deadliest catch fleet. However, not everything was play for him. Jonathan, similar to his dad, runs a tight ship despite his playful side, exhibits an authoritarian streak, and always carries an AK-47 rifle. Jonathan became a prominent figure on the cast because the audience loved his balanced personality. He sailed with sturdy zip ties, but was this necessary? Jonathan revealed that not all of his crewmates were easy to deal with. They attempted to go against orders, putting the ship and other crew members in danger, so he tied them up until they returned to harbor. Was that legal? Of chaos and order, some say, while others think Jonathan blew the details of his sea adventures to make them sound more exciting. For example, after bringing in a haul of crabs on one trip, Jonathan boasted that he had found an unusual creature, and he even went so far as to say it was a rare species. After getting his haul, Jonathan kept fishing for more crabs, but then he opened one of the cages and saw a strange fish, an aquatic creature that was both beautiful and terrifying, according to Jonathan. The fish had a huge glob on its mouth that let it blend in with its surroundings, creating a terrifying camouflage. Even though the animal wasn't poisonous, no pictures of it have surfaced. Some even thought he was making it all up. The show's producers were behind all of his pranks. The show frequently features conflicts stemming from the intensely competitive crab fishing industry and the harsh conditions in which the captains operate. Refrain from showing these conflicts, but some viewers began to suspect that the producers were manipulating the conflicts between the co-stars. They also believed that the ship accidents were staged for dramatic effect, and that the intense attention surrounding Jonathan was a marketing ploy. Does this imply that David's accident was staged? What about the incident that had Purderreich that Nianchanya works with other captains and shares information with them from time to time? He shared information with Cornelia Marie, Casey, and Josh so that their vessels would meet their quotas. However, that partnership wasn't always reciprocal, because when Casey and Josh and Jonathan had a disagreement, fans believe it was scripted. Casey was afraid that John, being so amiable, would tell other crabbers about their secret spots, so Josh and Casey kept telling John that they didn't have any, even though Josh wanted to tell John about their promising crabbing spots. However, they neglected to mention one important detail about John. He had a great instinct even when Casey and Josh weren't around. After Josh told him about their fishing spots, he kept using them. Some fans think the scenes were staged to make the audience laugh, but if there's one thing that's real about the show, it's Jonathan's love of crabbing. Jonathan loves crabbing as much, if not more, than anyone else on his crew, knows the risks involved with running a tight ship, and will swiftly detain and fire any problematic crew members. Jonathan is always willing to put himself in harm's way to save his crew members. On one occasion, one of his crew members was thrown overboard and was in danger of hypothermia due to the relentless icy waves. Upon seeing the man, Jonathan wasted no time in taking action, swung into action and rescued him, but the near-death experience of a crew member devastated him. Following the incident, Jonathan sobbed uncontrollably. He had already endured the shipwreck, broken bones, nose and teeth, bleeding, cold, and other extreme conditions, but this one had shaken him to his very core.
Tragically, in 2017, he witnessed an even more devastating event at sea as the 98-foot crab vessel Destination sank. The deaths of their fellow crabbers rocked the entire fleet off the coast of George Island. Little did anyone know that this incident had the greatest impact on Jonathan, who ultimately decided to leave the show after the 13th season. However, he wanted to make a grand exit, so just before he announced his retirement, he went for a run and took one of the Wituduan. Jonathan faced the greatest risk of his career when he embarked on a 600-mile journey near the Russian border, using 40,000 gallons of fuel without any nearby support. If anything went wrong, he would have entered Russian territory, which would have been disastrous for him, given his history of tensions with the Russian crabbing fleet. In the past, the two had even tackled each other while fishing in the same area. Although they met Jonathan there, the Russians warned him over the radio to leave and not set any of his crab pots. The Russians weren't polite, and they were sure their intimidating voice would scare Jonathan away. However, what they weren't prepared for was Jonathan's fearlessness and untamed nature. Jonathan was already angry with the Russians for the way they treated him. In the past, Russian fishermen relied on bottom-feeding fish caught with nets, which was bad for the long-term viability of crab fishing. Jonathan was very concerned about protecting the aquatic ecosystem. He had to give up crabbing and release all of his crabs back into the water after learning that they could become extinct if they weren't allowed to reproduce. Despite his reluctance to give in to pressure, Jonathan contacted Casey and the two of them devised a brilliant plan. They set sail in opposite directions, but stayed in the same general area, creating a blockade that stopped the Russian draggers from invading their fishing grounds. The plan was a success, and Jonathan and Casey were both rewarded, reached their destination with a bounty of crabs and a clean environment. Returning to Jonathan's last haul, he achieved the highest crab pot numbers of the season without any assistance. The fleet saluted his return to the harbor with flares, marking a triumphant milestone in his career. It was a fitting way to end his tenure. While filming the 6th season of the show, Jonathan, Andy, and Sig were involved, but there were other businesses they could have been running instead of sailing and risking the seas. These included Time Bandit Fireworks, Time Bandit Productions, Time Bandit Spirits, and Time Bandit Entertainment. The captains were accused of putting fishing ahead of filming, which led to a standoff and a temporary departure from the show. Fortunately, they were able to resolve the dispute in time for Season 7, but it did strain their relationship with the network, and Andy ultimately decided to leave. Hansen were sued for $3 million by Discovery Channel over scheduling conflicts. Following a fallout between the Hilstrand family and the Discovery Channel during the production of a spin-off series called Hilstranded, Andy decided he didn't want to be involved with the show anymore, and Jonathan came back. However, by 2018, Jonathan had joined his brother on the sidelines, and the two of them had put up a vessel for... But then another captain, Sig Hansen, whom Jonathan greatly respected, paid him a visit and told him he had to come back and save the fishery. As Jonathan pondered the matter, he discovered that his crab quota would be lost if he didn't use it. So now Jonathan is back to his best game.